In this video I'm trying to address, trying to keep in the realm of my last video as far as foreign relations, and trying to also implement what's kind of being going on in the political atmosphere right now and in the last 10 years. As you see in the title of the video, war. You know, do we even know what war is anymore? I mean, we're into conflicts or police actions, but what is war? In this video we're going to try to define war. We're going to try to define what is a constitutional war, and we'll try to dabble into the just war theory. Like I said, dabble, because you could spend, there are classes on the just war theory. Also constitutional war, but like I said, enlightening myself and hopefully you in the concept of war and U.S. policy, dealing with war, and how I think and how our framers thought we should deal with conflict and the such. First, I would like to go into defining what war is. Webster's dictionary defines war. Its first definition is a state of usually open and declared open hostile conflicts between states and nations. I guess that's a very basic definition, meaning that we would have declared war. It's between two defined states or nations, and it involves hostile conflict. So there's no gray area there in that definition. The next definition that they give has, infinite gray area. A state of hostility, conflict, and antagonism. I guess that's a hugely broad definition of war, but nevertheless is one. And the third and final I'd like to give is a struggle or competition between opposing forces for a particular end result. Those are three very good definitions of war. Three different, kind of angles on how to look at war itself. All three involving some kind of conflict or hostility, obviously. One of them stating that it's between two nations, the other simply stating that it just involves a state of hostility or conflict, meaning if me and you were arguing and it had hostility or feelings of antagonism in it, then that could be considered. Personally, when it comes to defining war, I would kind of combine several of those points in all three of those definitions. I would define a war as a hostility or angst between two opposing forces, but those opposing forces are looking for a particular end, whether it be the same particular end or goal, or several different outcomes. But you definitely have to have hostility and or conflict in there, two or more opposing forces, and a specific or particular end goal in mind. The next topic or point I would like to make to help us understand the overall term war and what we're involved in right now is a constitutional war. To do that, you have to obviously get into the Constitution and look at the powers of the executive branch and legislative branch, and try to define what their actual rights and powers are and limits of power are. Constitutional war is always going to be a struggle to say this is what's a constitutional war, because just like anything else that's written down, one person reads it different from another. They interpret it different from the other. Although I don't think the Constitution is, extremely open to too much interpretation. It's pretty well defined. Others believe that it's a living document or flowing document. Yes, you can amend to the Constitution and the such, but unless there's amendment to that particular state, I think it's pretty well defined in how we're supposed to move forward and how we're supposed to frame our government based on this prolific document. First, I'd like to look into the executive branch and the given powers that the Constitution gives to the executive branch relating to war. Obviously, in Article 2, Section 2 is the biggest part of this. It makes the president the commander-in-chief. This is what has been used over the years in conflicts in Bosnia by President Clinton. It's been used in the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea. Basically, it said that the presidents then and the executive branches then said, we don't have to go through Congress because I am the commander-in-chief and I have the power to do what I will with the military, which I think is a huge overstep, but we'll get into that. A second part is, I think that's interesting, that isn't brought up very much, is the Amendment 4 in the Constitution. It states that the Commander-in-Chief has a duty to protect each state from invasion. How do you define invasion? How do you, was 9/11 technically an invasion? Or was it just an attack? You can use our Amendment 4 in arguing that it was an invasion, therefore, going to Afghanistan and Iraq, therefore could be a constitutional war. There's so many sides to this; it's really hard to say. Those are the main. Then you have Article 1, Section 8 deals with the legislation branch and gives them the power to declare war, raise and support armed forces, and control the armed forces funding in war. Excuse me. Article 1, Section 8 basically defines Congress has the power to declare war only. Like we said earlier, war has a wide interpretation. So it's hard to say what is a war, what is not. One of the popular phrases that has been used against Congress is that this is a police action. It's not a war, it's a police action. And everybody's heard the phrases, we're policing the world, is it our job to police the world, blah, blah, blah. That's where that comes from, because you're redefining an action or a conflict away from war into a police action so that they don't have to go through the constitutional steps in declaring a war. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 is a reaction to the Vietnam War and Congress's fear of the executive branch's established power in being able to go into conflicts like Vietnam without congressional or the people's support. So they passed a clause, the War Powers Resolution of 1973, adding on to the War Powers Clause, which, as I stated earlier, is Article 1, Section 8, defining Congress's power to declare war and the such. The War Powers Resolution not only tries to hinder the executive branch's power, but it also gives them a little leeway to react to conflicts quickly, while also having to still go through Congress. It basically says that they have to notify Congress within 48 hours of the action. The executive branch can still carry out the action if it's within that 48 hours, but if the conflict is still remaining after 60 days, with a 30-day pullout period allowed, so a period of 90 days basically, that a declared war must be passed through Congress. Otherwise, the action has to come to an end, and it's no longer legal or constitutional. So the War Powers Resolution of 1973 tried to reel in the executive branch somewhat, but obviously hasn't done so too successfully, as we've had many conflicts since then that have not been declared wars.